Hello and welcome to my stationary castle, or as I call it, a house. Today I'm going to be comparing two pieces of media, one a film, the other a book. It's of course that very relevant in 2024 topic, Howl's Moving Castle, released in 1986. Of course I guess you already knew that by reading the title. Unless you can't read, and that's why you're here, looking for someone who can read to tell you what the story's about. Whatever reason you have for being here, let me just get straight into it. And I will be spoiling both the book and the movie. But wait, don't leave just yet. I'll give you some headline facts. Some non-spoilers, the opposite of spoilers in fact. Some enhancers. Enhancer number 1, the film looks incredible. Of course it does. Number 2, the film has a ridiculous amount of charm, which is separate from the book. It's not just a copy of the tone, it's its own thing, and it's wonderful. Number 3, the characters are hit and miss. Calcifer is incredible. Sophie is fine. Michael is a child, where he was previously a teenager. And Howl, I do not like. Number 4, I don't like the change in the antagonist. Number 5, I don't like the change in the third act and how it distracts from the main themes of the book. Now everyone who does want spoilers or wants to watch me justify my ridiculous opinions, please stick around. But not for too long. I've got company coming over later. So I'll address the headline points in more detail, unlike the film, which addresses the points of the book in less detail. The film looks incredible. By that I mean, I don't believe the world is credible. And physicists tell me it's not. The film obviously looks better than the book because as far as I'm aware the book just looked like pieces of paper. Now if you extend the look of the book to my imagination, it still loses out there because it's my imagination, not Miyazaki's imagination. The film also captures an incredible amount of charm. I think I said this before, but it's distinct from the book. The book is a much more typical fairy tale focused story, whereas this one has sort of a European in the early 20th century kind of style. That look and feel is entirely new, and Ghibli does a great job of sort of threading that through the entire story. It's still warm, it's still inviting, it's still cozy, but it's a little bit harsher, it's a little bit more on edge, which suits this film. The music also adds an incredible tone to the film. There's a sort of nostalgia that's present here, which isn't present in the book. You feel as if you're looking back at something that happened in the past, even though it's in another world. Now, whilst I'm covering some good stuff, I will also cover the good character in the film compared to the book, and that's Calcifer. He adds a huge amount of humour into this story. He's changed from the book a little bit. He's a little bit more dark and a little bit more sinister in the book, not massively so. But here, the added humour, the added fun, the sort of strange American voice, at least in the English dub, sort of brings some more life to it. I think the book does a good job of having humour go throughout most of the scenarios and through most of the characters throughout the book, whereas the film puts a lot of that onto Calcifer, and I think it does serve the character very well. Now, onto all the other characters, and I will start with the main character, Sophie. Sophie is a difficult one to judge because on the face of it, it is a reasonably good adaptation. She is the same young 18-year-old who's timid, she is the same cranky old lady. What I think the film does a worse job at though is it takes away a lot of her flaws. In the book, Sophie is a much worse person through most of the story. She's a lot more judging, she acts harshly, she throws pots and pans at people's heads. She's a bit of a terrible person. Despite that, the book is told from her point of view, so you get a lot of added humour from seeing her flaws and seeing how she justifies her actions and how she reacts with the world. Flawed people are generally far funnier. It's why I'm so deeply unfunny, because I'm so perfect. When someone is a protagonist of a story and they're a bad person, or a very good person, you learn a lot more about them because they have to interact with the world, which is often neither one of those two things. When they interact with the world, you see how they interpret the response they receive, and that tells you a huge amount about them. Sophie in the film interacts with the world sort of normally. She's kind sometimes, but not too kind. She's mean, but not too mean. She's just a little bit too much of a normal old lady, or a timid young girl. And then by the second half, by the third act, she's a lot more just a standard heroine love interest. This means we get a much less well-rounded character in my opinion. The theme of being not overly good, but not all the way bad, is something that goes through a lot of the book, which is more or less lacking in the film. It's the idea of turning the fairy tale view of good characters and bad characters kind of on its head. Sophie is one of the best examples of that. Sophie starts the book as timid and shy and able to express her opinions, unlike my comment section. She learns as she becomes an old woman to share her opinions, very, very freely, to judge people harshly, to make her mind up and snap judgments, exactly like my comment section. By the end of the film, she has to come to terms with the fact that she has been wrong. She has been too harsh. She has been too opinionated. Most people she's interacted with land somewhere in the middle. They are not bad people. They are not good people. They are sometimes bad people, and they are sometimes good people. And that's the lesson that she learns. In the movie, though, Sophie is never really harsh enough to have to learn that lesson. She never has to reckon with the fact that she was judging people far too meanly earlier. She just sort of is a good person. In the book, she treats Howl like a demon who is pure evil pretty much the entire way through, even when there's evidence that he's not. When she sits down with the king at the palace, she tries to conjure up ideas of ways that he's bad, ways that he's evil, ways that he's wicked, and she can't quite. The evidence is right in front of her that he's not a terrible person, and yet she just goes back to assuming that he is, because those are the tropes of the stories that she's grown up believing in. She herself believes that she's not capable of becoming much more than a cranky old lady, because she is the eldest child, which is a superstition in the book, but that isn't necessarily there in the film. She believes she won't amount to anything, so she lives up to that. This is exacerbated so much by the fact that she is actually the one putting the curse on herself in the book. It doesn't get cured, it doesn't get solved. She is the one who is causing herself to look like an old lady because she is living up to the deterministic nature of the world. Generally, it's a story about revealing your true self, not transforming into someone completely different. It's about not trusting stories and not believing misconceptions. These things are in the film. They're just not the main focus of the film. Now, when you talk about characters, you do have to talk about the one the book and film are named after. Howl. I do not care for Howl. This goes for both book and film. I think he is enjoyable, but I think he can be a little bit too much, and you don't have quite enough to grasp onto. The reason that I do prefer him in the book to the film is because the book treats him with disdain the entire way through. The book knows he's a bad person, and it keeps telling us that. He's not evil, like Sophie believes throughout the story, but he's not good. You see it through Sophie's perspective mostly about how vain he is, how fickle he is, how selfish, how immature and emotionally unstable he is. Whereas in the movie, he is those things, but he's also supposed to be the coolest guy to ever live. He's suave and kind and sophisticated. He does magic with just a slight wave of his hand, and he speaks in low, dulcet tones. He's calm and composed, except for sometimes when he isn't. In scenes where his hair is dyed the wrong colour and he turns into slime, that's what he's like in the book pretty much the entire way through. In the film, it feels almost like it comes out of nowhere. Then he goes back to being normal again. Then he goes back to being a crazy, vain, weird guy. It goes back and forth between the idea of this hero who's selflessly sacrificing himself every single night and the weird, vain wizard guy who's immature and has no responsibilities. I've heard it said the book is the story from Sophie's perspective and the film is the story from Howl's perspective, and that does make some sense, because Howl is the kind of person to make himself entirely insufferable as a protagonist. In the climax of the movie, Howl is flying around being a bird and saving the day and saving the world and getting the girl at the end of the day and being cool whilst he does it. In the book, he misses most of the events because he's hungover from having celebrated a rugby club reunion in Wales. To me, this sort of characterization is more consistent throughout the story in the book. I respect the man more in the book because he's a loser all the time. The one in the film just makes me kind of cringe. The focus the film has on Howl saving the world does bring me nearly onto my next point, almost as if I'd planned it that way. That next point is the primary conflict, and by conflict I don't mean the conflict that I'm starting with the Ghibli fanbase, I mean the conflict in the narrative structure of both things. In the book, the conflict's a far more internal one. Sophie is focused on steadying the ship, or castle, in keeping her relationships with the people inside of it on an even keel, and also on trying to break the curse that she has and the curse that Calcifer and Howl have. Her family life is also more intertwined with the story, which also involves Michael, or Markle, and Howl in her day-to-day life. Howl's side plot is also far more subdued. He's not saving the world, he's just having day trips in Wales. There's a fantastic detail actually where Miyazaki depicts Wales as this hellscape. It's a fantastic adaptation from the true life source material. I think we learn a lot more about Howl by seeing him interact with normal people than we do seeing him be a birdman stopping a war. Seeing his interactions with people he's trying to court, seeing him come into conflicts with people over ordinary day-to-day tasks tells you a lot more about him. The reason I'm focusing so much on the subplots and why I think it is better to have them focused on the characters rather than on an overarching story is because the story relies on the characters come the end. The subplots for both characters is focused on their relationship with their past and how that might or might not determine their future. This, I think, is more effective than focusing on a war. Now, I know what you might all be saying. I don't like the film because I'm pro-war. But that's not the reason. The movie takes a very thematic approach to its storytelling. It focuses on themes of war rather than on character motivations. And that is fine if the resolution to the story rests on plot resolution and not character resolution. The issue is that both the book and the film sort of hand-wave away the endings. There's no real conclusive plot resolution that makes a lot of sense. In the book, that's fine in a way because we don't really care. In the movie though, they introduce so many plot threads, so many new strange characters, that we do sort of need that resolution. The book is very character focused, whereas the movie is very thematically focused, and I just don't think that's right for this kind of story because the story is in essence a character driven one. The ending of the book is kind of hand waved away with magical nonsense and mumbo jumbo that you don't really care about, but that's fine because we don't care about the resolution to the plot, we just care about the resolution to the characters. In the movie, the plot is in fairness unrecognisable by the end, and I'll just briefly highlight the differences there. In the movie, the wicked Witch of the Waste is sort of a companion, come old lady, come annoyance, come maybe still a villain. It's kind of hard to tell. Howl is off flying around trying to stop bombers and henchmen from a different witch. Sophie causes the castle to crack completely in two, getting separated from everyone else because she poured water on Calcifer. She then travels back in time to tell Howl to come and find her in the future, which he does. Then she gives him back his heart, which cures both of their curses simultaneously. Then she kisses the scarecrow on the cheek, who turns into a man who turns out to be the prince of the kingdom that someone is at war with. He says that he came back to life as a real person because he received true love's kiss, which I guess means it's Sophie, despite the fact that Sophie is with Howl and also not really in love with the scarecrow. So he leaves, and then the other antagonist, the witch in the palace, just sort of stops the war because she's looking at them through a dog, and she decides that the film has ended. In the book, they aren't at war, and the Witch of the Waste is the primary villain throughout the entirety of the story. She's trying to capture Howl for one of her sort of DIY projects. She lures Sophie away from the castle under the pretense that she has Howl's love interest as a hostage. She doesn't really. The love interest is actually her version of Calcifer in disguise as a person from the valleys. Howl then does some magic to destroy the witch. Sophie then reunites Howl with his heart because she also is a witch, which we have learnt throughout the book. She then breaks her own curse after having broken Howl and Calcifer's curse, and she does this just because she stops applying it. The scarecrow does turn back into a man, but there's two men, one's a dog, one's a scarecrow, and a skull on a table. It's all very confusing. Then Sophie's sisters are paired up with the various people they've been courting throughout the film, one of which is an appropriately aged Michael, not an 11-year-old. Howl and Sophie live together happily ever after, and the story concludes. So both of those endings are, in fairness, kind of nonsense. The issue is that the film introduces a much more serious tone, and it bypasses a lot of the character moments with the main characters in favour of introducing new ones and more plot point. This means that you're sort of relying on the film to explain some of the things it's introduced, whereas you aren't doing that for the book. In the book, you never really cared about the plot because the book never really cared about the plot, whereas in the film, it seems to really care about the story. In the book, you just want to see that all the characters have learnt their lessons, that they've grown a little bit, or they've realised the person they should have been all along. A little example of that is just the fact that Sophie was brave and was also kind. She was the two things she was never being simultaneously throughout the rest of the book at the finale, where she goes out to sacrifice herself to rescue Howl's love interest, who she previously threw out of the castle because she didn't like her very much. She is not timid, but she is not rude. Michael said earlier on in the book that he would know if Howl was in love if he didn't spend 2 hours in the bathroom before rushing out to meet a girl. We see him at the same finale, arriving to save Sophie from the Witch of the Waste, and he's unclean, he's unkempt, he's messy. In fairness, the film had him show up as half of a bird, so maybe the film does have me beat there. In summary, I think the movie does an exceptional job capturing a mood. I think it's charming, I think it's lovely to look at, I think it's fantastic to be in that world. They've taken something from a book and they've expanded on it and personalised it to a more Ghibli tone. On the other hand, it relies on that tone pretty substantially. It bypasses a lot of the character moments that make the ending satisfying and introduces more stuff than the book has without really resolving them in a meaningful way. Films tend to strip out things in a book and focus on just the core points, whereas when you take in both of these two pieces of media, it's almost as if they've done the reverse. Where the book is focused just on the central characters and their central conflicts, the film is focusing on a few more characters, but it's more scattered in its approach. The film is very clearly beloved by many, many people, and I don't think it's a bad film. I just don't think it's a good adaptation. It's a beautiful and layered look at life. I just think it should have maybe been looking somewhere else. There we are. Thank you so much for watching, and also in advance, I'm so sorry to everyone who loves this film, which I think is probably most people. Please let me know your feelings on the book and the film, or both, or neither. Just let me know what you think. Let me know also if there are any books you want me to unfairly criticise in the future, but until then, goodbye.